After losing her husband, Eleanor Whitmore trusted the two people closest to her, until she discovered they had been quietly stealing from her while smiling across the dinner table. This is a story about family betrayal, silent revenge, and the kind of quiet strength people often underestimate in older women. And if you enjoy emotional family drama series like this, don't forget to like, follow, and stay with us until the very end.
My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 70 years old. And 3 years ago, I learned something that changed the way I looked at family. Forever. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The kind of afternoon most people would forget. The sky over Columbus, Ohio, was gray and heavy with rain. The parking lot outside the pharmacy shimmered beneath the wet pavement, reflecting the glow of traffic lights and storefront signs. I remember because I was standing in line, holding a small white paper bag that contained my blood pressure medication. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. Just another errand in a life that had become remarkably quiet after my husband died. Harold had been gone for 18 months. 18 months! Sometimes it felt like yesterday. Other times it felt like 100 years. The woman in front of me was arguing with the cashier about a coupon. A little boy was crying near the greeting cards. Someone's cell phone kept ringing. Life moved around me the way it always does. Busy, indifferent, unaware. Then my phone vibrated inside my purse. I ignored it. At my age, most notifications are either advertisements or reminders about doctor's appointments. A few seconds later, it vibrated again. I sighed and reached for it. The screen lit up. At first, I thought I was reading it wrong. Then I adjusted my glasses and read it again. Chase fraud alert. Purchase approved. $4,892. Aegean Crown Resort, Santorini, Greece. I stared at the screen. For a moment, I honestly thought it was a mistake, a scam. One of those fraudulent messages older people are always warned about. I almost deleted it. Then another notification appeared. Business class airfare, luxury spa reservation, ocean view suite. My stomach tightened, not because of the amount, because of the dates. I knew those dates. I had seen them on the family calendar. Vanessa's vacation, my daughter-in-law's healing trip. I remember standing perfectly still. The sounds around me seemed farther away somehow, muted, like I was underwater. The cashier looked up. "Ma'am?" I blinked. "Oh, sorry." I stepped aside and opened my banking application. The screen loaded slowly. Every second felt longer than it should have. Then, the transactions appeared, one after another. Airline tickets, hotel deposits, spa treatments, private excursions, restaurant charges. Thousands of dollars. All connected to the same trip. All connected to Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. The woman who hugged me every Sunday after church. The woman who told people she loved me like a second mother. The woman who smiled every time she said, "Eleanor, don't worry about anything. Jason and I will always take care of you." I felt cold, not angry, not yet, just cold. The cashier called my name again. I walked back to the register. "That'll be $38.16. I opened my wallet. Inside were two $20 bills, a few singles, and a small pouch filled with quarters. I had started carrying coins after Harold died. Every dollar mattered now. Retirement wasn't supposed to feel this tight. Harold had worked for 42 years. I had taught elementary school for nearly 3 decades. We weren't wealthy, but we were careful, responsible, prepared. At least that's what I believed. I counted quarters into my hand. 1, 2, 3. Behind me, someone sighed impatiently. I apologized softly. "Just a moment." My voice sounded calm, steady, almost normal. But inside my chest, something had already begun to crack. Because while I was counting coins to pay for medication, someone had spent nearly $5,000 from my retirement account. And deep down, I already knew who. The rain had stopped by the time I left the pharmacy. The air smelled like wet pavement and gasoline. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes before turning the engine on. The paper bag rested on the passenger seat. My medication, 3 months' supply. A necessity I had spent the entire morning debating whether I could afford. I thought about Harold, about the promises we made to each other, about the years we spent saving, skipping vacations, driving older cars, delaying luxuries, building security, building stability, building a future. And suddenly, for the first time, I wondered something I never thought I would ask. Had someone been quietly spending that future behind my back? The drive home felt longer than usual. Every red light gave me another minute to think, another minute to remember, another minute to connect pieces I hadn't wanted to see. When I pulled into the driveway, Vanessa's SUV wasn't there. Neither was Jason's truck. They were still traveling, still enjoying Greece, still posting smiling photographs online, while I sat in my car holding a paper bag full of medication and a phone full of transactions I couldn't explain. I remember looking up at the house, the same house Harold and I had built our lives in, the same house where Jason took his first steps, the same house where Christmas dinners filled every room with laughter. And for the first time, it didn't feel safe. It felt unfamiliar, like something inside it had changed. Or maybe someone. I turned off the engine, picked up my medication, and walked slowly toward the front door because I wasn't ready to confront anyone. Not yet. I wasn't ready to cry. I wasn't ready to accuse. I wasn't even ready to admit the truth. But as my hand touched the doorknob, one thought echoed through my mind. Over and over, over and over. Someone had been spending my old age like it belonged to them. 3 days later, Vanessa and Jason came home from Greece. I knew because I heard the SUV pull into the driveway just after 4 in the afternoon. The sound carried through the kitchen window while I was peeling potatoes. For a moment, I simply stood there. The knife paused in my hand. The potatoes sat untouched on the cutting board, and my heart wanted an explanation. Something reasonable, something innocent. Because no matter what the bank statement suggested, a small part of me still hoped there was some mistake, some misunderstanding, some explanation that would allow me to keep believing the people I loved. The front door opened. Laughter filled the hallway. Vanessa's voice arrived first, bright, energetic, carefree. "Oh my God, I missed my own bed," Jason chuckled. "You said that yesterday at the airport. Because it's true." Their footsteps moved across the hardwood floor. Then Vanessa appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked radiant. Sun-kissed skin, fresh highlights, perfect manicure, a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. The first thing she did was smile. The same smile she always used. Warm, practiced, dangerously convincing. "Eleanor!" She rushed forward and hugged me. I stood still for half a second before returning the embrace. "Welcome home," I said. "You wouldn't believe how amazing Greece was." I smiled politely. "I'm glad you enjoyed yourselves." Vanessa laughed. "Enjoyed?" "Eleanor, it was life-changing." Life-changing. The phrase lingered in the room. I looked down at the potatoes, at the old wooden cutting board Harold bought me 20 years ago, and I thought about the fraud alert, about the thousands of dollars, about my retirement account, about the medication I had almost delayed purchasing. But I said nothing, because silence reveals more than confrontation. People become careless when they believe they're safe. And Vanessa looked very safe. Dinner that evening felt almost normal. Almost. The dining room glowed beneath the soft yellow light of the chandelier. The same chandelier Harold installed himself. The same dining room where we celebrated birthdays, graduations, anniversaries. The same room where I once believed family meant security. I carried the roast chicken to the table. Vanessa immediately pulled out her phone. "Oh, wait until you see these pictures." Jason laughed. "Here we go." Vanessa ignored him. She unlocked her screen and began scrolling. Photo after photo. White stone villas, crystal blue water, private yachts, sunset dinners overlooking the sea. I placed the serving platter onto the table. The smell of rosemary filled the room. Nobody noticed I hadn't sat down yet. "Look at this one," Vanessa said excitedly. She turned the phone toward Jason. "Oh, wow. Right? We should go back next year." Next year. The words struck me harder than they should have, because according to my bank records, they had never truly paid for the first trip. Jason shook his head. "I don't know if we can afford another one." Vanessa laughed. "We'll figure it out." I watched her carefully. Not her smile, not her words, her confidence. That was what bothered me. She wasn't worried. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't acting like someone who had done something wrong. She behaved like someone who believed she would never face consequences. Then she reached for her wine glass, and the sleeve of her sweater slid back slightly. A gold bracelet caught the light. New, expensive, beautiful. I had never seen it before. Neither had Harold, because Harold had been dead for 18 months. And somehow, Vanessa's lifestyle seemed to improve every month after his death. "Where did you get the bracelet?" I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. Vanessa smiled. "Oh, this?" She lifted her wrist proudly. "Little souvenir." Jason laughed. "That wasn't little." Vanessa swatted his arm playfully. "Eleanor, you only live once." "Only live once." I repeated the phrase silently. Then I looked down at my dinner plate. At 70 years old, I had learned something different. You only retire once. You only grow old once. You only get one chance to make your savings last. And somebody had been helping themselves to mine. After dessert, Vanessa disappeared briefly upstairs. Jason remained at the table. For the first time all evening, we were alone. The silence between us felt unfamiliar, heavy. He looked tired, older than his 42 years. I studied him carefully, trying to find the little boy who used to run through this house wearing superhero pajamas, trying to find the son I trusted. Finally, I spoke. "Did you enjoy Greece?" Jason smiled. "Yeah." A pause. Then another. "It was nice. Nice. Thousands of dollars. Luxury resorts. Business class flights. And all he could offer was nice." I nodded slowly. "I'm glad." He looked relieved, as though he had passed some invisible test. Then Vanessa returned carrying shopping bags. Several of them. Designer logos printed across glossy paper. Jason stood immediately. "Ready to unpack?" She grinned. "Absolutely." The two of them headed upstairs together, laughing, talking, planning. The sound faded down the hallway, and suddenly the house became quiet again. I remained alone at the dining table. 3 empty wine glasses, half-finished dessert, the smell of roasted chicken still hanging in the air. Slowly, I reached for Vanessa's forgotten phone charger. She had left it beside her chair. An ordinary mistake. Nothing suspicious. Nothing important. Yet as I held it in my hand, a strange thought crossed my mind. Not anger, not revenge, just realization. A realization so simple it frightened me. The people I trusted most no longer worried about what I might discover. They had become comfortable, careless, certain. And certainty is often the beginning of a downfall. I looked toward the staircase, listened to their laughter echo from the second floor. Then I lowered my eyes to the dining room table, to the house Harold spent 4 decades building, to the life we sacrificed for, to the future we carefully protected. And for the first time since receiving that fraud alert, I stopped asking whether Vanessa had taken my money. Instead, I asked a different question. A far more dangerous one. How much had she taken? That night, after everyone went to bed, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. There is a difference. Peace feels comforting. Quiet feels empty. And after Harold died, I learned that lesson every single day. I sat alone in the living room, wrapped in the same blue blanket he used to tease me about. "You've had that thing for 20 years, he would laugh, "and it'll survive 20 more. Back then, I used to roll my eyes. Now, I held that blanket like it was part of him. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the windows. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily. Tick, tick, tick. Every sound seemed louder when you lived alone. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to think about those weeks after Harold's funeral, the weeks when everything changed. At the time, I didn't see it. Looking back now, I should have. Harold and I were married for 44 years. 44 years of early mornings, mortgage payments, school lunches, holiday dinners, arguments, forgiveness, laughter, life. We weren't wealthy people. We were careful people. Harold used to say, "Wealth isn't about what you spend, Ellie. It's about what you protect." He believed in preparation, emergency funds, retirement accounts, insurance policies, trusts. Every dollar had a purpose. Every document had a folder. Every folder had a label. Sometimes I joked that he loved spreadsheets more than people. He'd laugh and say, "Maybe, but the spreadsheets won't forget your birthday." Even now, I can hear his voice. And maybe that's why what happened afterward hurt so much. Because Harold spent his entire life protecting me, and I unknowingly opened the door for the people who would hurt me most. The funeral was held on a Thursday. Cold, gray, quiet. Hundreds of people attended. Former co-workers, neighbors, church friends, family. Everyone said the same things. "He was a wonderful man. He loved you so much." He always talked about his family. They were right. Harold loved his family, especially Jason, our only child. I remember standing beside Harold's casket while Jason wrapped his arm around my shoulders. His eyes were red, his voice cracked, and in that moment, all I saw was my son grieving his father, nothing else. After the service, Jason stayed late helping clean up. So did Vanessa. She hugged me repeatedly, brought food, answered phone calls, handled paperwork. At the time, I was grateful. Grief makes ordinary kindness feel extraordinary. One evening, about 2 weeks after the funeral, Jason came over carrying takeout containers. We sat at the kitchen table eating Chinese food. Neither of us spoke much. Finally, he looked at me. "Mom?" I looked up. "Yes?" He hesitated, then smiled gently. "I've been thinking." I remember that smile. Warm, concerned, protective. Or at least that's what it appeared to be. "You've got a lot on your plate right now." I laughed softly. "I suppose I do." Jason nodded. "Maybe Vanessa and I could help." I frowned slightly. "Help with what?" "The bills." I stared at him. "The bills?" "Just temporarily." He leaned forward. "No pressure. I just know Dad handled a lot of the finances." I looked down at my tea. The truth was, Harold had handled most of it. Not because I couldn't. Because we divided responsibilities. He managed investments. I managed the household. It worked for 44 years. Jason continued speaking. "Mom, you've been through enough." His voice sounded sincere, comforting, safe. "I don't want you stressing about passwords and account logins." I remember smiling. Actually, smiling. Because I thought my son was worried about me. I thought he cared. I thought family was stepping in when family was needed, so I agreed. A week later, Jason helped organize several accounts online. Nothing major? At least that's what I believed. We sat together at my dining room table, laptop open, paperwork spread everywhere, passwords updated, contact information reviewed, beneficiary forms checked, routine things, boring things, the safe things. Vanessa joined us halfway through. Coffee in hand, smiling as always. "Oh, good," she said. "You guys are making progress." Jason laughed. "Mom finally let me help." Vanessa sat beside me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. The same perfume she still wears today. She squeezed my hand. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore, Eleanor. I remember feeling emotional, not because of the accounts, because I missed Harold, because I was exhausted, because grief makes you vulnerable in ways you don't recognize until much later, and because, for a brief moment, I believed I was being cared for. Vanessa smiled warmly. We're family. Family. Such a simple word. Such a dangerous word when placed in the wrong hands. The following months passed quietly. Or so I thought. Jason called more frequently. Vanessa stopped by often. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes with coffee, sometimes for no reason at all. At least that was what I told myself. But looking back now, certain things began changing. Small things. Easy to miss things. Vanessa's clothes became more expensive. Weekend trips became more frequent. Restaurant dinners appeared regularly on social media. New jewelry, new handbags, new purchases. Every few weeks, there seemed to be something else. At the time, I never questioned it. Why would I? People spend money. People buy things. People enjoy life. Besides, who looks for betrayal inside their own family? Not me, not then. But sitting alone in my living room that night, 18 months later, everything suddenly looked different. The memories, the conversations, the timing, the details. Every piece felt sharper now, more defined, like a photograph finally coming into focus. I stared across the room toward Harold's empty chair. The chair nobody else sat in. The chair I still couldn't bring myself to move. And for the first time, a painful possibility settled heavily inside my chest. Maybe the theft hadn't started recently. Maybe Greece wasn't the beginning. Maybe Greece was simply the first time I noticed. The grandfather clock continued ticking. Tick, tick, tick. And as I sat there in the darkness, one realization became impossible to ignore. The moment I gave Jason access to my accounts was the exact moment I lost control of who was spending my future. The moment I gave Jason access to my accounts was the exact moment I lost control of who was spending my future. That thought stayed with me long after midnight. I sat alone in the living room, staring at the dark television screen. The house was silent. Upstairs, Jason and Vanessa were asleep. At least, I assumed they were. Meanwhile, I sat there replaying conversations from the past 18 months. Tiny moments, little details, things I had ignored because I trusted them, things that suddenly felt different. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Sleep had come in short fragments, 30 minutes here, an hour there, nothing restful, nothing deep. I made coffee the way Harold liked it, strong, black, simple. Old habits survive long after people don't. The kitchen window overlooked the backyard. Harold's roses were beginning to bloom again. For a moment, I watched the morning light settle across the grass, and I wished more than anything that Harold were sitting across from me, because Harold always noticed things. Details, patterns, people. He used to say, "Most lies don't hide in words, Ellie. They hide in behavior." At the time, I thought he was talking about business. Now, I wasn't so sure. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. A social media notification. Normally, I ignored those, but something made me open it. And there she was, Vanessa, smiling beneath a bright Mediterranean sky. The caption read, "Healing after such a difficult year. Grateful for every blessing." A small pink heart followed the sentence. I stared at the screen, then slowly began scrolling. Photo after photo, photo after photo, photo after photo. Luxury hotel balconies, private beach access, designer cocktails, spa treatments, sunset yacht cruises, a private dinner overlooking the sea. Everything looked expensive, painfully expensive. But it wasn't the resort that caught my attention. It wasn't the yacht. It wasn't even the champagne. It was the handbag, a cream-colored designer handbag hanging casually from Vanessa's shoulder. My chest tightened because I recognized it immediately. 6 months earlier, I had seen that exact bag displayed in a department store downtown. I remembered standing in front of the window for almost a minute, not because I wanted to buy it, because I admired it. The craftsmanship, the stitching, the elegance. Then I checked the price tag. $2,300. I laughed and walked away. Some things simply weren't practical. Not for a retired school teacher, not for someone living carefully. Yet somehow, Vanessa owned one. I enlarged the image, studied it. There was no mistake. The same bag, the same brand, the same gold hardware. I lowered the phone slowly, then placed it face down on the table. For several seconds, I simply sat there, motionless. The coffee had gone cold. The house remained quiet. And for the first time since receiving the fraud alert, I felt something new. Not grief, not confusion, not denial, embarrassment, because the signs had been there. The signs had been there for months, and I had missed them. Or worse, I had chosen not to see them. A few days later, I met my friend Claire Benson for brunch after church. Claire and I had known each other for over 30 years. We raised children together, attended school events together, sat beside one another at countless church services. If there was anyone who could tell when something was wrong, it was Claire. The restaurant was crowded. The usual Sunday crowd, families, couples, retirees. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. Claire arrived carrying her oversized handbag and wearing her usual skeptical expression. She sat down across from me. "You look tired." I laughed softly. "Good morning to you too." "I'm serious." She studied my face. "What's going on?" I immediately looked away, a habit I didn't even realize I had. Claire noticed. Of course she noticed. She always noticed. The waitress arrived and took our orders. When she left, Claire folded her arms. "Talk." I smiled weakly. "There's nothing to talk about." Claire raised one eyebrow, the same expression she used whenever one of her grandchildren lied. "Eleanor." I sighed, then looked down at my coffee cup. The truth sat heavily inside me, too large to ignore, too painful to say. Before I could answer, the waitress returned with the bill. I reached into my purse, pulled out several dollar bills, then began counting coins, nickels, quarters, dimes, small amounts, carefully organized. Claire's expression changed immediately. "What are you doing?" I looked up. "What?" "Eleanor." Her voice lowered. "Why are you counting coins?" I forced a smile. "Because that's what people on fixed incomes do." Claire didn't smile back. For a moment, she simply stared at me. Then she leaned forward, slowly, carefully, the way people approach wounded animals. "Harold spent 42 years planning your retirement." I swallowed. Claire continued. "You shouldn't be struggling." I looked away, toward the window, toward the parking lot, anywhere, except at her, because hearing those words hurt, because she was right, and because deep down, I knew something was wrong, very wrong. Claire reached across the table, placed her hand gently over mine. "Eleanor." I finally met her eyes. "What happened?" The question lingered between us. Simple, direct, impossible to avoid. For several seconds, I considered lying, telling her everything was fine, telling her I was simply being cautious, telling her retirement had become expensive, but I was tired. So very tired, and carrying secrets alone becomes exhausting after a while. Without saying a word, I unlocked my phone, opened the banking application, and slid it across the table. Claire adjusted her reading glasses, looked down, and began scrolling. At first, her expression remained neutral. Then it changed, slowly, subtly. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightened. The further she scrolled, the quieter she became. Finally, she looked up. And what I saw in her face frightened me. Because Claire had spent 30 years working in banking. Claire understood money, patterns, transactions, fraud. And she looked concerned. Very concerned. Eleanor. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I felt my stomach tighten. What is it? Claire looked back at the screen. Then at me. Then back at the screen again. Finally, she exhaled. A long, slow breath. And said the words I think I already knew were coming. This wasn't an accident. The noise of the restaurant seemed to disappear. The conversations, the dishes, the laughter, everything faded. Claire tapped the screen. Once, twice, 3 times, showing me transaction after transaction, patterns, connections, dates, amounts, evidence. Then she looked directly into my eyes and spoke the sentence that changed everything. Vanessa knew exactly what she was doing. And suddenly, the betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was becoming a fact. Vanessa knew exactly what she was doing. The words settled between us like a storm cloud. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I simply stared at Claire, then at my phone, then back at Claire again. Part of me wanted her to take it back, to tell me she had made a mistake, to tell me there was another explanation, a misunderstanding, a banking error, anything. But Claire wasn't the kind of woman who spoke carelessly, especially when it came to money. She adjusted her glasses and continued scrolling through the transactions. The deeper she looked, the more serious her expression became. Finally, she turned the phone toward me. Eleanor, look at these dates. I leaned forward. My heart already knew what I was about to see. But I looked anyway. Claire pointed to several charges. Luxury department stores, airline deposits, resort reservations, online purchases. At first glance, they appeared random, unrelated, normal even. But Claire wasn't looking at individual purchases. She was looking at patterns. Do you see this? I frowned. No. She tapped the screen. These transactions happen within hours of each other. I looked again. She was right. A resort payment, then a boutique purchase, then another transfer, then a restaurant deposit, all connected to the same period, the same trip, the same spending cycle. Claire exhaled slowly. This isn't impulse spending. I swallowed. What does that mean? It means someone planned this. The restaurant suddenly felt warmer. My coffee tasted bitter. A strange pressure settled in my chest. Because hearing the truth spoken aloud makes it impossible to ignore. For months, I had sensed something wasn't right. But suspicion is easy to dismiss. Facts are harder. Claire kept scrolling. Then she stopped abruptly. Her eyes narrowed. Well, I felt my stomach tighten. What now? She rotated the phone toward me. There, near the bottom of the statement, sat a charge I had completely overlooked. $387. A luxury spa membership. Monthly recurring payment. My forehead creased. I've never been to a spa. I know. Claire tapped the screen. It's been active for 11 months. 11 months. The number hit me like a punch. Not because of the amount, because of the time. 11 months. That meant this wasn't a recent decision. It wasn't a temporary lapse in judgment. It wasn't one bad choice. It was a habit someone had grown comfortable with, a habit someone expected to continue. I looked down at my hands, at the faint wrinkles crossing my skin, at the wedding ring Harold placed there 44 years ago, and suddenly I felt foolish. Not weak, not helpless. Foolish. Because while I was clipping grocery coupons, someone else had been treating my retirement account like a personal credit card. Claire must have noticed the change in my expression. She reached across the table. Eleanor, I looked up. This isn't your fault. I managed a small smile. Maybe not. Then I glanced toward the window. But I should have seen it. Claire shook her head immediately. No. Her voice became firmer. trusting your family isn't stupidity. The words hung in the air. And yet, they didn't completely comfort me, because trust had consequences, and I was living with them. For several moments, we sat in silence. The restaurant buzzed around us. Forks clinked, people laughed, waitresses hurried between tables. Ordinary life continued. Meanwhile, my world felt as though it had quietly shifted beneath my feet. Finally, Claire spoke again. "Eleanor, there's something else." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What?" She hesitated. A rare thing for Claire. Then she chose her words carefully. "How much access does Jason have?" I froze. The question landed harder than anything she'd said so far, because until that moment, I had focused entirely on Vanessa. Vanessa's spending, Vanessa's vacations, Vanessa's lifestyle. But Jason was my son, my only child, the little boy who used to leave dandelions on my kitchen counter, the teenager who stayed up all night studying for exams, the young man who cried at Harold's funeral. I wanted to believe he was innocent. I needed to believe it. Yet the numbers told a different story. I stared at the statement again. And for the first time, I noticed something uncomfortable. Every account log and authorization, every transfer approval, every linked access point, Jason's name appeared repeatedly. Not everywhere, but enough. Enough to raise questions. Enough to destroy certainty. Claire watched my face carefully. "I know what you're thinking." I swallowed. "No, you don't." Her voice softened. "Eleanor, people don't always become who we hope they'll be." The sentence hurt more than it should have, because deep down, I had spent 18 months believing Jason would protect me, the same way Harold always had. And now I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything. The waitress arrived with the check. Neither of us touched it. For a while, we simply sat there, thinking, processing, grieving something neither of us could properly name. Because financial betrayal isn't just about money. It's about trust. It's about safety. It's about discovering that the people sitting closest to you may not be standing beside you at all. Eventually, Claire folded her hands. "What are you going to do?" The question lingered. Simple, direct, dangerous. I looked down at the phone, at the evidence, at the months of transactions, at the thousands of dollars, at the life Harold spent decades building. And then I surprised even myself, because the answer came instantly, without hesitation, without anger, without tears. I slowly locked the screen, slid the phone back into my purse, and stood. Claire looked up. "Eleanor?" I picked up my coat, then looked directly at her. For the first time since this nightmare began, my voice sounded calm, truly calm. "Nothing." Claire blinked. "What?" I smiled, a small smile, a quiet smile, the kind that appears when a decision has already been made. Not yet. Because suddenly I understood something important. If Vanessa believed she was safe, she would keep talking. If Jason believed I suspected nothing, he would keep revealing himself. And if I remained silent, they would keep making mistakes. I looked toward the restaurant door, toward the bright afternoon sunlight beyond the glass. Then I spoke one final sentence, softly, carefully, almost to myself. People tell the truth when they stop worrying about being caught. And for the first time since receiving that fraud alert, I wasn't looking for proof anymore. I was waiting for them to give it to me. People tell the truth when they stop worrying about being caught. That thought stayed with me throughout the entire drive home. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky. Traffic moved slowly. The radio played softly in the background. But I barely heard any of it, because for the first time since Harold died, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was watching, observing, listening. And once you start paying attention, certain things become impossible to ignore. 3 nights later, Vanessa announced she wanted to host what she called a family wine night. Apparently, Greece had inspired her. At least, that's what she told everyone. "We never spend enough quality time together," she said cheerfully. while setting the dining room table. I stood beside her, folding cloth napkins. The irony almost made me smile. Quality time. Interesting phrase, especially coming from someone secretly spending my pension. The dining room looked beautiful that evening. Candles glowed along the center of the table. Crystal glasses reflected warm, golden light. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Vanessa loved appearances. Everything had to look perfect. Everything had to feel expensive, even when it wasn't hers. I watched her move around the room, adjusting place settings, straightening flowers, checking angles, not because she cared about family, because she cared about presentation. And there is a difference. Jason arrived carrying a bottle of wine. "Wow," he said. "This looks fancy." Vanessa smiled proudly. "It should." She kissed his cheek. "We deserve nice things." The words settled in the room. We deserve nice things. I wondered if she had ever said those same words while booking her spa treatments, or purchasing that designer handbag, or charging vacations to someone else's retirement account. If she had, I doubted she saw the contradiction. People rarely do when greed becomes normal. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Roast chicken, vegetables, fresh bread. Ordinary food served beneath extraordinary pretenses. For a while, everyone talked about harmless things. Weather, church events, television shows, vacation stories. Mostly vacation stories. Vanessa loved talking about Greece. The further we moved from the trip, the grander the stories became. The sunsets were magical. Jason nodded. They really were. The resort staff knew our names by the second day. That's true. The spa was unbelievable. Jason laughed. I think you went 3 times. 4. Vanessa corrected him proudly. 4. I took a slow sip of water. 4 spa visits. Paid for with pension money. Paid for with years of savings. Paid for with sacrifices she never made. Yet somehow, my hands remained steady. My voice remained calm. Because anger reveals your position, silence reveals theirs. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa reached for another glass of wine. By then, she was relaxed, comfortable, careless. Exactly as I hoped, then it happened. The first crack, small, subtle, but impossible to forget. Vanessa glanced around the dining room, then casually said, "You know, Eleanor." I looked up. "Yes?" She smiled. The kind of smile people use when they believe they're being helpful. "I've actually been researching senior living communities." The room became very still. Jason shifted slightly in his chair. I set down my fork. "Have you?" "Oh, yes." She nodded enthusiastically. "Some of them are amazing." Amazing. Interesting choice of word. Vanessa continued. "They have fitness centers, spas, social activities." I noticed she mentioned spas first. Of course she did. They're really more like resorts these days. Resorts. The word almost made me laugh. Jason cleared his throat. "Vanessa!" But she continued. "What?" She looked genuinely confused. "I'm just saying, there are wonderful options." Then she turned back toward me. Still smiling, still sweet, still pretending. "You shouldn't have to worry about maintaining a large house forever." I held her gaze for several seconds, long enough to make her slightly uncomfortable, not long enough to reveal anything. Then I smiled politely. "I see." The conversation could have ended there. It should have ended there. But Vanessa had grown too confident, too comfortable. And confidence often creates mistakes. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her legs, and said something I don't think she fully understood. "Honestly, I think people are happiest when they simplify things later in life." Simplify things. I looked around the room, at the walls Harold painted himself, at the chandelier he installed, at the photographs lining the hallway, at 44 years of memories. Then back at Vanessa. The woman discussing my future as though she already owned it. Jason finally spoke. "We just want what's best for you, Mom." Mom. The word sounded strange coming from him because he couldn't meet my eyes while saying it. He looked at his wine glass, his plate, the tablecloth, anywhere except me. And somehow, that hurt more than Vanessa's comments, much more, because Vanessa owed me respect. But Jason owed me loyalty. There is a difference, a very important difference. The conversation eventually moved on. Movies, neighbors, church fundraisers, normal topics. Yet something fundamental had shifted, at least for me, because I realized something sitting there beneath candlelight. Vanessa wasn't testing boundaries anymore. She was planning, thinking ahead, preparing. And people only prepare for things they believe are inevitable. The realization stayed with me long after dinner ended, long after the dishes were washed, long after the candles burned out. Around midnight, I walked quietly through the dark hallway toward my bedroom. As I passed the staircase, I paused. For a moment, I listened. Upstairs, faint laughter drifted beneath a closed bedroom door. Jason and Vanessa, happy, relaxed, completely at ease. And suddenly, I understood why. Because they believed I was still grieving, still vulnerable, still unaware. They thought I was an old woman struggling to keep up, an aging widow slowly fading into the background. They thought they had already figured me out. What they didn't understand, what neither of them understood, was that Harold spent 44 years teaching me something valuable. Never underestimate quiet people, because quiet people hear everything. And as I stood there in the darkness, listening to their laughter echo through the house my husband built, I felt something changing inside me. Not anger, not revenge, something colder, something calmer, something far more dangerous. For the first time since Harold died, I stopped wondering whether I could trust my family, and started wondering how much they thought they could take before I finally noticed. For the first time since Harold died, I stopped wondering whether I could trust my family, and started wondering how much they thought they could take before I finally noticed. That question stayed with me for days. Every conversation felt different afterward. Every smile, every compliment, every casual remark. It was as though someone had handed me a new pair of glasses. Suddenly, I could see details I had missed before. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. The following Thursday morning, I drove to the bank. I didn't tell Jason. I didn't tell Vanessa. I simply got into my car after breakfast and left. The sky was clear, the kind of beautiful spring morning Harold used to love. He always said sunshine made people honest. I wasn't so sure anymore. The bank sat only 15 minutes away. A familiar building. I'd been walking through those doors for nearly 30 years. The tellers knew my name. The manager attended my church. Everything felt ordinary, comforting, predictable. And maybe that was exactly what I needed, because lately, very little in my life felt predictable. After checking in at the front desk, I was escorted to the vault area, the same vault Harold and I had visited countless times over the years. Insurance papers, property records, retirement documents, important things. Harold believed important things deserved protection. As I followed the employee down the hallway, memories surfaced unexpectedly. Harold carrying folders beneath his arm. Harold double-checking signatures. Harold smiling whenever I teased him for being overly cautious. "You'll thank me someday." That was one of his favorite expressions. "You'll thank me someday." At the time, I thought he was joking. Now, I wasn't so sure. The employee unlocked the vault, then stepped aside. "Take all the time you need, Mrs. Whitmore." I nodded. "Thank you." A few moments later, I sat alone in a small private room. The safe deposit box rested on the table in front of me. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. The brass key felt cool in my hand, familiar, comforting, and strangely emotional, because Harold had always carried the spare key. Always, until the day he couldn't. Slowly, I inserted the key, turned it, and opened the box. Inside were decades of a life built together. Property deeds, insurance policies, savings records, old family photographs, carefully labeled folders, everything exactly where Harold would have left it. Orderly, precise, intentional. I smiled despite myself. Even now, he was organized. My fingers brushed across several documents before stopping on a photograph. Jason, age 8, missing front tooth, holding a fishing rod twice his size. Harold stood beside him, laughing. I stared at the image for a long time. The little boy in that picture felt so far away now, so distant, so impossible to reconcile with the man currently sleeping beneath my roof. Eventually, I set the photograph aside and continued searching. Then I saw it, a plain white envelope. Nothing remarkable about it, except for the handwriting. Harold's handwriting. Immediately my breath caught, because I recognized it instantly. Strong, neat, confident. Across the front were 3 simple words. For Ellie. My hands trembled, only slightly, but enough. Enough to remind me how much I still missed him. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Very still. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. Nothing more. No legal language. No financial instructions. Just a letter. A personal letter. Written by the man I loved for 44 years. For several seconds, I couldn't bring myself to read it, because part of me feared hearing his voice again, and another part feared I never would. Finally, I unfolded the page and began reading. The first few lines made me smile. Harold being Harold, practical, direct, a little stubborn. Then I reached the final paragraph, and everything changed. The words were simple, only one sentence, but they struck harder than anything I had heard since his death. If anyone ever mistakes your kindness for weakness, remind them who built this family. I stopped reading. The room blurred. My vision softened. For a moment, I simply sat there holding the paper, breathing, trying not to cry, trying not to break. Because suddenly, I could hear his voice. Not in my imagination, not as a memory, almost as if he were sitting beside me. Steady, calm, certain, the way he always sounded when life became difficult. And for the first time in months, I cried. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly. The way older people often cry, without witnesses, without noise, without asking anyone to notice. A few tears slid down my cheeks, then stopped. The room remained silent. The letter remained in my hands. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The sadness began to fade, not disappear, just shift, transform into something else. Strength. Because Harold wasn't telling me to be angry. He wasn't telling me to seek revenge. He wasn't telling me to punish anyone. He was reminding me of something I had forgotten, who I was. Before grief, before betrayal, before loneliness, I wasn't simply a widow. I wasn't simply someone's mother. I wasn't simply someone's mother-in-law. For decades, I had helped build a life, a family, a home, a future. And somewhere along the way, I had allowed people to treat me as though I were merely occupying space inside it. The realization settled deeply inside me. When I finally left the vault, I carried only a few documents and Harold's letter. The rest stayed exactly where they belonged. The drive home felt different, lighter somehow. The trees seemed greener, the sky brighter, not because my problems had disappeared, because they hadn't. Vanessa was still spending money. Jason was still hiding things. The betrayal was still real. But now, something else was real too. Clarity. When I pulled into the driveway, Vanessa's SUV was already there. I could see her through the kitchen window, scrolling on her phone, smiling, probably shopping, maybe planning another trip, maybe spending someone else's money. Again, for a moment, I remained inside the car, watching, thinking. That was the last day I behaved like a victim. The following Monday, I called an attorney. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted a fight, because I wanted facts. At 70 years old, I had learned something important. Emotions create confusion. Facts create clarity. And right now, clarity was exactly what I needed. His name was Daniel Reeves. Harold and I had worked with him years earlier when we updated our estate planning documents. I remembered him as quiet, careful, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. 3 days later, I sat across from him in a conference room overlooking downtown Columbus. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The sky was gray. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Daniel reviewed the documents Claire had helped me organize. Bank statements, account records, transaction histories. Every charge connected to Vanessa's spending, every suspicious withdrawal, every transfer. He studied everything carefully, methodically, without interruption. For nearly 20 minutes, the only sounds in the room were turning pages and distant thunder. Finally, he removed his glasses, folded his hands, and looked directly at me. His expression told me the answer before he spoke. Mrs. Whitmore. I sat straighter. Yes, he hesitated, only briefly, then chose his words carefully. What you've described is extremely serious. A strange calm settled over me. Not fear, not panic, just confirmation. Because part of me had already accepted the truth. I simply needed someone else to say it. Daniel tapped the stack of statements. This pattern is consistent with financial exploitation. The phrase sounded clinical, cold, professional, yet somehow that made it more painful. Financial exploitation, such a sterile term, such an ugly reality, because behind those words were real things. Harold's savings, my retirement, years of sacrifice, years of planning, years of trust, all quietly converted into vacations and luxury purchases. I swallowed. And Vanessa? Daniel nodded slowly. The evidence strongly suggests she knowingly benefited. Knowingly benefited. Another polite phrase. A lawyer's phrase. But I understood what it meant. She knew. She knew exactly where the money came from. And she spent it anyway. I looked toward the rain-covered window. For a moment, I said nothing. Then I asked the question I had been avoiding. My son? The room became very still. Daniel glanced down at the paperwork, then back at me. His answer came gently, perhaps more gently than I deserved. Based on the records, Jason had authorized access. The words landed heavily, not because they surprised me, because they confirmed my greatest fear. I closed my eyes briefly, just long enough to steady myself. When I opened them again, Daniel was watching me carefully, concerned, respectful, patient. You don't have to make any decisions today. I almost laughed, because everyone kept saying that. Claire, Daniel, friends from church. People assumed I needed time, that I needed space, that I needed to process. The truth was, I had already spent weeks processing, weeks grieving, weeks accept. What I needed now was information, nothing else. I leaned forward slightly. What happens next? Daniel opened another folder, one I hadn't seen before, a thicker folder, older. The cover contained Harold's name. Immediately, my attention sharpened. Daniel noticed. Your husband was very thorough. A small smile touched my lips. That sounds like Harold. Daniel nodded. It certainly does. Then he opened the folder. What happened next changed everything. Absolutely everything. For several moments, Daniel reviewed pages filled with legal language. Trust documents, ownership records, estate protections. The terminology was dense, complicated, the kind of paperwork most people skim. But Daniel understood every word. Finally, he stopped, looked directly at me, and asked, "Did Jason ever tell you the house had been transferred?" I frowned. Transferred. What do you mean? Daniel blinked, then slowly sat back in his chair. Interesting. Almost as though he suddenly understood something I didn't. Mrs. Whitmore. He slid a document across the desk. This property was never transferred. I stared at him. The words didn't register immediately. What? Daniel pointed towards several highlighted sections. The home remains protected inside the trust structure your husband created. My heartbeat quickened. For the first time all afternoon, I looked down, then back at him. I'm sorry. My voice sounded distant. Could you explain that again? Daniel nodded, patiently, carefully. The house does not belong to Jason. Silence. The house does not belong to Vanessa. More silence. The house remains entirely protected. I stared at him, unable to speak, because suddenly dozens of conversations replayed inside my mind. Vanessa discussing senior living facilities. Vanessa talking about simplifying my life. Vanessa referring to future renovations, future plans, future changes. As though ownership were inevitable. As though the house were already theirs. And yet, it wasn't. It had never been. A slow realization spread through me. Vanessa didn't know. Jason might not know either, or perhaps he assumed. Either way, they had built expectations on a foundation that didn't exist. Daniel continued explaining legal protections, trust provisions, ownership rights, safeguards Harold established years earlier. I heard most of it, not all, because one thought kept repeating inside my head. Harold knew. Even then, Harold knew. Somehow, years ago, he anticipated a future where I might need protection. Not from strangers. Not from criminals. From people much closer. The realization was both heartbreaking and comforting. Daniel eventually closed the folder. What would you like to do? The question hung between us. Rain continued, tapping against those windows. Cars moved through the streets below. Life carried on outside. Inside, everything felt different. I looked down at Harold's name on the legal documents, then at the bank statements, then at the evidence. Finally, I smiled, not happily, not bitterly, just calmly, the way someone smiles after solving a difficult puzzle. Then I answered, softly, deliberately, with complete certainty. I want them comfortable. Daniel frowned slightly. Comfortable? I nodded. A slow, measured nod, because I finally understood something. People become careless when they feel safe. People reveal themselves when they believe they've already won. And Vanessa believed she had already won. I folded my hands, looked directly at Daniel, and finished the sentence. I want them comfortable enough to stop hiding. I want them comfortable enough to stop hiding. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He simply studied me. Perhaps he expected anger. Perhaps he expected tears. Most people do, especially when they hear stories like mine. They imagine dramatic confrontations, screaming, accusations, doors slamming. But age teaches you something younger people often miss. The strongest move isn't always the loudest one. Sometimes, it's patience. When I returned home that afternoon, Vanessa was sitting at the kitchen island, a laptop open in front of her, coffee beside her, shopping websites reflected in her glasses. She looked up as I entered. Oh, good, she smiled. I was wondering where you went. I hung my purse by the door. Just running errands. Vanessa nodded. No suspicion, no concern, no curiosity. Exactly as planned. Because the less she worried about me, the more she revealed about herself. Over the next several weeks, I became the easiest person in the house to underestimate. I cooked dinner, folded laundry, watered Harold's roses, attended church, smiled politely, asked ordinary questions, behaved exactly as I always had. Meanwhile, I quietly changed passwords, updated account security, created copies of financial records, documented every suspicious transaction, every purchase, every transfer, every charge. Daniel guided me through the process carefully, methodically, step by step, no drama, no confrontation, just preparation. And while I was preparing, Vanessa was becoming increasingly comfortable, increasingly confident, increasingly careless. One Saturday afternoon, she walked into the kitchen, carrying a stack of home renovation magazines. I was baking blueberry muffins. The smell filled the room, warm, comforting, familiar. Vanessa placed the magazines on the counter, then casually flipped through the pages. "Oh, I love this." I glanced up. She pointed at a photograph. A fully remodeled master bedroom. Modern furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Luxury finishes. Very expensive. Very impressive. I smiled politely. "It looks nice." Vanessa nodded enthusiastically. "I know, right?" Then she said something that made my hand stop moving. Only for a second. Just a second. But enough. "One day, we should do something like that upstairs. Upstairs. Not if. Not maybe. Not someday if circumstances change. One day." As though the decision had already been made. As though ownership had already been decided. As though my future was merely a waiting period. I continued stirring the batter. Carefully. Steadily. Without looking at her. "What makes you think the house needs renovating?" Vanessa laughed. "Oh, come on!" She waved dismissively. "It's a little outdated. Outdated. Interesting word. The house Harold built. The house where Jason grew up. The house that carried decades of memories. Reduced to a decorating project." I nodded, then returned my attention to the muffins. Because sometimes silence encourages people to keep talking. And Vanessa loved talking, especially about things she believed belonged to her. A week later, I noticed another change. More packages. Large packages, small packages, designer boxes, luxury brands. Nearly every day seemed to bring another delivery. One afternoon, a driver carried 3 oversized packages to the front door. Vanessa practically ran outside to meet him. Excited, smiling, thrilled, as though Christmas had arrived early. I watched from the living room window. Quietly, unnoticed. Later that evening, I saw several receipts lying beside her purse. Only briefly, but long enough. Thousands of dollars, furniture deposits, travel reservations, online purchases. The spending wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating. And somehow that didn't surprise me anymore. Because greed rarely moves backward. It moves forward. Always forward. Searching for the next thing. The next upgrade. The next luxury. The next justification. Then came the conversation that changed everything. It happened late, one Tuesday night. I couldn't sleep. Lately, sleep seemed harder to find. The house was dark, silent, still. I walked downstairs for a glass of water. Nothing unusual, nothing planned. Just another restless night. As I approached the kitchen, I heard voices. Soft voices. Coming from the family room. Jason and Vanessa. The lights were off. Only the television cast a faint blue glow across the room. I paused. Not intentionally. Not at first. Then I heard Vanessa speak. And something in her tone made me stop. "How much longer?" Silence. Then Jason answered. His voice sounded tired. "Vanessa, seriously." She sighed heavily. "How much longer are we supposed to wait?" My grip tightened around the stair railing. Every instinct told me to leave. But I didn't. Because something told me this mattered. Jason lowered his voice. "I don't know." Vanessa laughed. A short, sharp, humorless laugh. Then she said the sentence I will never forget. "Once the house transfers, we're done pretending." The words sliced through the darkness. Clean, precise, cruel. My heartbeat slowed, not sped up, slowed. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The senior living comments, the renovation magazines, the future plans, all of it. Vanessa continued speaking. Completely unaware, I could hear every word. "I am exhausted." Jason said nothing. Vanessa's voice grew harder. "We've spent years being patient. Years, not months, years." The realization settled heavily inside me. This wasn't opportunistic. This wasn't impulsive. This had been planned. For a long time, Jason finally spoke. Weakly, quietly. "Just give it more time. More time. Not stop. Not don't. Not you're wrong. More time." I closed my eyes. And in that moment, something broke. Not my heart. That had already happened. Something else. The final piece of doubt. The final excuse. The final hope that my son had somehow remained untouched by all of this. Vanessa sighed again, then delivered one final sentence. A sentence so casual, that I think it hurt more than everything else. She's old, Jason. Silence. No correction. No defense. No protest. Nothing. Only silence. And sometimes, silence tells you everything. I stood there for several seconds, listening, breathing, understanding. Then I quietly turned around, walked back upstairs, and returned to my bedroom. Not crying, not shaking, not angry, just certain. Because at that moment, I finally understood something. They weren't waiting for an opportunity. They believed the opportunity was inevitable. And that belief was about to become their biggest mistake. As I sat on the edge of my bed, staring into the darkness, one thought echoed calmly through my mind. Patience had brought me the truth. Now it was time to decide what to do with it. Patience had brought me the truth. Now it was time to decide what to do with it. The morning after I overheard that conversation, I woke up before dawn. Not because I couldn't sleep. Oddly enough, I slept better than I had in weeks. Because uncertainty is exhausting. Truth isn't. Truth may hurt. Truth may disappoint. Truth may break your heart. But at least truth gives you direction. And for the first time since Harold died, I knew exactly where I stood. The house was quiet. The sky outside still dark. I walked into the kitchen and started a pot of coffee. The familiar smell filled the room, rich, warm, comforting. For a few moments, I stood by the window, watching the first traces of morning light touch Harold's rose garden. He would have liked this morning. Calm, orderly, purposeful. I smiled softly. Then I picked up my phone and called Daniel. 3 hours later, I sat across from him once again. This time, I wasn't searching for answers. I already had them. This time, we discussed strategy. Daniel listened carefully as I repeated everything I had overheard. The conversation, the assumptions, the plans, the comment about the house. Most of all, the comment about me. She's old, Jason. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough for me to know what he was thinking. When I finished speaking, he folded his hands. Mrs. Whitmore. I looked up. You've been remarkably patient. I laughed quietly. That's one word for it. Daniel smiled faintly, then opened a folder. Inside were neatly organized documents. Bank records, trust paperwork, property ownership records, account statements. Everything carefully arranged. Every fact, every transaction, every lie hidden inside numbers. The sight of it brought me unexpected comfort. Because facts don't argue. Facts don't manipulate. Facts don't pretend. They simply exist. And the facts were finally on my side. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked quietly, methodically. I gathered records. Daniel prepared legal notices. Claire helped organize timelines. Every charge Vanessa made was documented. Every transfer, every luxury purchase, every vacation expense. Piece by piece, the picture became complete. Meanwhile, life inside the house continued, as though nothing had changed. And that was exactly what I wanted. Vanessa continued shopping, continued planning, continued talking about future renovations. One evening, she arrived home carrying several expensive shopping bags. She set them on the kitchen counter and smiled proudly. Guess what? I looked up from my crossword puzzle. What? I found the perfect dining chairs. Dining chairs for a dining room she didn't own. I smiled politely. That's nice, Vanessa grinned. You'll love them. The confidence in her voice was almost impressive. Almost. A few days later, she mentioned another vacation. This time, Italy. Jason looked uncertain. Vanessa looked excited. And I sat quietly at the table eating soup, listening, observing, waiting. Because every day that passed brought them closer to believing they had won. And people who think they've won often stop paying attention. One Friday afternoon, Daniel called. His voice sounded calm, professional, prepared. Everything was ready. The legal notices, the documentation, the property records. All of it. One final meeting, one final conversation. And then the truth would arrive. Not as an accusation, as evidence. That distinction mattered. Because accusations create arguments. Evidence creates silence. After the call ended, I sat alone in the living room. The same room where Harold used to read the newspaper every evening. The same room where Jason opened Christmas presents as a child. The same room where I had spent months grieving. For several minutes, I stared at Harold's empty chair. Then I found myself speaking aloud, something I hadn't done in a long time. "Well, Harold," my voice sounded small. The room remained still. I smiled. They really underestimated me. The silence that followed felt strangely comforting, as though somewhere, somehow, he already knew. That weekend, I baked a lemon pie, Vanessa's favorite. The irony wasn't lost on me. She walked into the kitchen and immediately smiled. "Oh my God," she laughed. "You're spoiling us." Us, interesting word. I placed the pie on the counter. "Am I?" Vanessa grinned. "You've been so sweet lately." I looked directly at her, for just a second. Long enough. Then I smiled. The same polite smile she had seen for years. "Age teaches patience," she laughed. Thinking it was a joke. Thinking I was talking about retirement. Thinking I was talking about growing older. She had no idea what I meant. And that was the beauty of it. Across the room, Jason watched us quietly. His expression troubled me, because unlike Vanessa, he seemed nervous lately, distracted, uneasy, as though part of him sensed something approaching. Not the details, not the plan, just the feeling. The feeling people get when consequences finally begin catching up. That evening, after everyone went to bed, I walked through the house one last time. The hallway, the dining room, the kitchen, the living room. Every space carried memories. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, family photographs, laughter, loss, love. I touched the banister Harold built with his own hands, ran my fingers along the polished wood, and suddenly realized something important. For months, I had been fighting to protect more than money, more than property, more than legal rights. I had been protecting dignity. My dignity, Harold's legacies, the truth, because some things deserve defending. Even when the people attacking them share your last name. I turned off the final light and headed upstairs. Tomorrow would begin the last chapter of this story. Tomorrow, the waiting would end. Tomorrow, masks would come off. And for the first time since receiving that fraud alert at the pharmacy, I felt completely calm, because everything was ready. The evidence, the paperwork, the truth, all of it. And as I stood outside my bedroom door, one final thought crossed my mind. A thought so simple, so certain, so satisfying. The cruelest people often mistake silence for permission. Vanessa was about to learn the difference. The cruelest people often mistake silence for permission. Vanessa was about to learn the difference. The following Sunday began like any other. That was intentional. I woke up early, made coffee, attended church, smiled at neighbors, listened to the choir, shook hands after the service. To anyone watching, I was simply Eleanor Whitmore, a 70-year-old widow enjoying an ordinary day. Nothing more, nothing less. And that was exactly what I wanted them to believe. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, everyone had arrived home. Jason settled into the living room. Vanessa sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone. I could hear occasional laughter as she watched videos. Carefree, relaxed, comfortable. The same word Daniel and I had discussed weeks earlier. Comfortable. Because comfortable people reveal who they truly are. At precisely 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Vanessa looked up. Jason frowned. I walked calmly toward the front door. Neither of them moved. Neither of them knew who was standing outside. But I did. I opened the door. Daniel Reeves stood on the porch, holding a leather briefcase. Beside him was a legal assistant, carrying several folders. The moment Vanessa saw them, her smile disappeared. Not entirely. Just enough. A flicker, a crack. The first sign that something had changed. I stepped aside. "Please come in." Daniel nodded politely. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore." The room suddenly felt different. The air itself seemed heavier. Jason stood, confused. "Mom?" Vanessa slowly lowered her phone. Her eyes moved from Daniel to the folders, then back to me. I smiled politely, the same smile she had seen 1,000 times. Only now it meant something very different. I think it's time we had a conversation. Silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Daniel placed his briefcase on the dining room table. The same table where Vanessa had discussed renovating the house. The same table where she talked about senior living facilities. The same table where she smiled while spending my future. How appropriate. Jason looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mom, what's going on? I pulled out a chair and sat down, slowly, calmly, deliberately. Then I folded my hands. Please sit. Neither of them argued. That surprised me. Perhaps they sensed what was coming. Perhaps they already knew. Vanessa sat first. Jason followed. Daniel remained standing. Professional, composed, prepared. Everything Harold would have appreciated. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Daniel opened the first folder. The sound echoed loudly in the silence. Paper against paper. Simple, ordinary, terrifying. Vanessa finally laughed nervously. What is this? No one answered. Daniel removed several documents, placed them neatly on the table, then spoke. His voice was calm, measured. Impossible to misunderstand. Mrs. Whitmore requested a review of her financial records. The color immediately drained from Vanessa's face. Not completely, but enough. Enough for me to notice. Enough for Jason to notice, too. Daniel continued. The review identified a pattern of unauthorized expenditures. Silence. Vanessa swallowed. Jason looked at her, then at me, then back at Daniel. The room seemed to shrink. Suddenly. Noticeably. As though the walls themselves were listening. Daniel placed several statements in front of them. Bank records. Transaction histories. Vacation expenses. Spa charges. Luxury purchases. Every single one documented. Every single one dated. Every single one traceable. Vanessa stared at the pages. Her breathing changed. Just slightly. But I noticed. Because I had spent weeks watching her. Learning her tells. Learning her habits. Learning who she really was. And, for the first time, she looked afraid. Daniel continued. These transactions total several $1,000s. Nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. The evidence was doing all the talking. Jason looked down at the paperwork, then slowly toward Vanessa. His expression had changed. Confusion first, then concern. Then something darker, something closer to realization. Finally, Vanessa spoke. Her voice sounded smaller now. There's an explanation. Of course there was. There always is. People rarely confess immediately. They explain, justify, redirect, delay. It's human nature. Daniel nodded politely. I'm listening. Vanessa straightened slightly, grasping for control, grasping for confidence, grasping for the version of reality she preferred. Eleanor told us we could help manage things. I remained silent. Daniel remained silent. Vanessa continued. Sometimes accounts get mixed up. Accounts get mixed up. Interesting phrase. As though Santorini vacations accidentally appeared. As though spa memberships accidentally renewed themselves. As though designer handbags accidentally purchased themselves. Jason looked at her. Vanessa. She ignored him. Her voice grew stronger, more desperate. Everything was for family. Family. There was that word again. Always family. Always the shield. Always the excuse. Meanwhile, Daniel opened a second folder. This one thicker, more detailed, more dangerous. Inside were months of records, patterns, dates, authorizations, connections. The entire story, presented without emotion, presented without opinion, presented as fact. And facts can be brutal, especially when they refuse to bend. Daniel slid several pages across the table. Would you like to explain these recurring spa charges? Vanessa froze. The room became silent again. Painfully silent. Because there was no explanation. Not a believable one. Not anymore. Jason picked up the documents. Read them. Then read them again. His face slowly lost color. Page after page. Charge after charge. Evidence after evidence. Until finally he looked at Vanessa. Not angrily. Not yet. Just shocked. Vanessa. His voice cracked slightly. What is this? For the first time all afternoon, she didn't have an answer. The silence lasted nearly 10 seconds. 10 very long seconds. Then she whispered, I can explain. But she couldn't. Not really. Because explanations require facts. And facts were no longer on her side. The room remained still. Then Daniel opened the final folder. The important folder. The one Harold had prepared years earlier. The one Vanessa never knew existed. I watched her carefully. Almost sympathetically. Almost. Because I knew what was about to happen. And she didn't. Daniel placed a document in the center of the table. Property records. Trust records. Ownership documents. The future Vanessa believed belonged to her. Except it didn't. Not even close. Daniel adjusted his glasses, then spoke clearly. This property remains fully protected under the Whitmore Family Trust. Jason frowned immediately. Vanessa blinked. What? Daniel repeated himself, patiently, precisely. The home does not transfer automatically. Silence. The home does not belong to Jason. More silence. It does not belong to Vanessa. The room stopped breathing. At least that's how it felt. Because suddenly every assumption collapsed at once. Every expectation. Every plan. Every dream Vanessa had quietly built. Gone. Just like that. I watched her face carefully. The confusion arrived first. Then disbelief. Then panic. Pure panic. No. She shook her head. No, that's not right. Daniel calmly slid the documents toward her. It is. Vanessa grabbed the papers. Read them. Flipped pages. Read again. Searching desperately for a different answer. A different outcome. A different reality. But there wasn't one. There was only the truth. And the truth was devastating. Jason stared at the documents. Then at me. Then back at the documents. His voice sounded distant. Almost childlike. You mean? Daniel nodded, Mrs. Whitmore retains complete authority. Complete authority. 3 simple words. 3 beautiful words. Vanessa pushed her chair back suddenly. This is ridiculous. There it was. The anger. The entitlement. The mask slipping away. Finally. After all these months, finally she stood. Pointing at the paperwork. At Daniel. At me, at reality itself. This isn't fair. Fair. I almost laughed. Fair. The woman who used my pension to fund luxury vacations wanted to discuss fairness. Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. Daniel remained calm. I remained calm. Only Vanessa was losing control. And the more she spoke, the more she revealed. You don't understand. Her voice rose. We've invested years into this family. Years. Interesting choice of words. Invested. Like she expected a return. Like kindness was a business transaction. Like patience earned ownership. Suddenly, everything made sense. Every smile. Every compliment. Every performance, not love, investment, not family. The expectation, not loyalty, calculation. The realization settled heavily across the room. Even Jason seemed to see it now. For the first time, he looked genuinely horrified. Not by me, not by Daniel, by her, and perhaps by himself, because silence has consequences too. Finally, I stood. Slowly. The room immediately became quiet. Not because I raised my voice. Because I didn't. Not because I demanded attention. Because I didn't need to. I simply stood there. A 70-year-old widow. A retired schoolteacher. A woman they thought was fading. A woman they thought wasn't paying attention. A woman they underestimated. Then I looked directly at Vanessa and spoke, calmly, clearly, without anger, without hatred, without emotion, which somehow made it even stronger. You spent my pension. Silence. You planned my future without my permission. More silence. And you mistook my grief for weakness? Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. Because there was nothing left to say. The evidence had already spoken. The truth had already arrived. And the masks were finally gone. Then I reached into the folder in front of me, removed one final document, and placed it gently on the table. Directly in front of Vanessa. Directly in front of Jason. The room became so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. I looked at both of them. Then said the sentence that changed everything. You have 30 days to leave my house. You have 30 days to leave my house. The words settled over the room like thunder. No one spoke. No one moved. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. Vanessa stared at me, completely frozen. The confidence she had worn for months was gone. The smile, the certainty, the superiority, all of it had vanished. And in its place stood a woman confronting something she never expected. Consequences. Jason looked down at the notice, then back at me. His face had become pale, almost unrecognizable. For the first time that afternoon, he looked exactly like the little boy from the fishing photograph in Harold's safe deposit box. Lost, confused, afraid. But unlike that little boy, this man had choices, and he had made them. Vanessa was the first to speak. Her voice trembled. You can't be serious. I looked directly at her. I've never been more serious. She shook her head repeatedly. This is insane. No. What was insane was believing someone could secretly spend another person's retirement savings and face no consequences. What was insane was planning a future around property that never belonged to you. What was insane was mistaking patience for weakness. But I didn't say any of that. I simply stood there, calm, steady, certain, because the truth no longer required defending. The truth was already sitting on the table. Jason finally found his voice. Mom! That single word almost broke my heart. Almost. Because once upon a time, hearing my son say Mom could soften any disappointment, any frustration, any disagreement. Not anymore. Too much had happened. Too much had been revealed. Jason swallowed hard. We can fix this. I looked at him quietly, then asked the question that had lived inside me for months. When were you going to tell me? Silence. His eyes dropped immediately. That told me everything. Not because he answered, because he didn't. The room remained painfully still. I continued. When were you going to tell me about the pension? Nothing. When were you going to tell me about the vacations? Still nothing. When were you going to tell me about the plans for my house? Jason closed his eyes. The shame on his face was real. I believe that. Even now, I believe it. But shame after discovery isn't the same thing as integrity before it. And that distinction matters. Vanessa suddenly pushed back her chair. This is unbelievable. Her voice rose, sharp, defensive, angry. This family wouldn't even exist without everything we've done. Daniel remained silent. His assistant remained silent. I remained silent. And without realizing it, Vanessa continued digging her own grave. We've sacrificed years for this family. There was that word again. Sacrificed. As though kindness had been an investment strategy. As though helping occasionally entitled her to ownership. As though love came with a receipt. Finally, I spoke, softly, but clearly. What exactly did you sacrifice, Vanessa? The question landed harder than any accusation, because she had no answer. Not a real one. The room fell quiet again, and for the first time all afternoon, Vanessa looked uncertain, very uncertain, because beneath every manipulative person lies one uncomfortable weakness. They struggle when forced to explain themselves honestly. A few minutes later, Daniel stood. The meeting was over. The paperwork had been delivered, the evidence presented, the notices served. Nothing more remained to be said. As he gathered his documents, he looked toward me. Mrs. Whitmore. I nodded. Thank you, Daniel. He offered a small professional smile, then left. The front door closed behind him, and suddenly it was just the three of us. Family, or what remained of it. No one spoke for a long time. Eventually, Vanessa stormed upstairs. The sound of the bedroom door slamming echoed throughout the house. Then silence returned. Jason remained seated, staring at the table, staring at the paperwork, staring at the damage.
He looked up.
And, for the first time since Harold's funeral, I saw genuine tears in his eyes. Not fear, not frustration, not self-pity, regret. Real regret. Mom, his voice cracked. I'm sorry. The words hurt more than I expected. Because part of me had waited months to hear them, and another part knew they had arrived too late. I sat down slowly across from him. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then I asked, "Were you ever going to stop her?" Jason stared at the table. His silence answered before his mouth did. Eventually, he whispered, "I don't know." And somehow, that answer hurt more than a lie. Because it was honest. Painfully honest. The truth was simple. He hadn't protected me. He hadn't stopped her. He hadn't chosen a side. He had simply allowed things to happen. Day after day, month after month, until silence became participation. I nodded slowly, then stood. The conversation was finished. Not because I hated him. Because there was nothing left to discuss. Healing would take time. Trust would take longer. Some wounds close quickly, others don't. Over the next month, the house changed. Boxes appeared. Furniture disappeared. Arguments echoed behind closed doors. Vanessa barely spoke to me. When she did, it was cold, short, resentful, as though I had wronged her. Strange how some people react when they lose access to something they never owned. Jason spoke occasionally. Mostly practical conversations. Moving arrangements. Mail forwarding. Logistics. Nothing personal. Nothing emotional. Not yet. The final day arrived quietly. No dramatic scene. No shouting. No revenge speech. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, a moving truck parked in the driveway. Workers loaded furniture, boxes, suitcases. Everything. By late afternoon, it was over. Vanessa climbed into the passenger seat without looking back. Not once. Not a single glance. Perhaps that was fitting. Because she had never really seen this house anyway. She only saw what she hoped to gain from it. Jason lingered longer, standing beside his car, hands in his pockets, the same way he used to stand after baseball practice as a teenager. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he walked toward me, slowly, carefully, as though approaching something fragile. "Mom." I looked at him. His eyes were red. "I really am sorry." This time, I believed him. Not because the words changed anything. Because they sounded true. And sometimes truth matters even when it arrives late. I nodded. Nothing more, nothing less. Then he surprised me. He stepped forward and hugged me. Briefly. Awkwardly. Like someone who wasn't sure he deserved to. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he did. I haven't decided. When he finally pulled away, he climbed into his car. A few seconds later, they were gone. Just like that. The driveway stood empty. The house stood quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, I was alone. Truly alone. Yet strangely, I didn't feel lonely. I walked it through the house slowly. Room by room. Window by window. Memory by memory. The evening sun stretched across the hardwood floors. Harold installed himself. The roses bloomed outside. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. Home. Still home. I eventually stopped in the living room beside Harold's chair. The chair no one else ever sat in. Then I reached into my pocket and unfolded his letter one final time. My eyes found the sentence immediately. "If anyone ever mistakes your kindness for weakness, remind them who built this family." I smiled. Not because I had won. Because this was never about winning. It was about remembering. Remembering my worth. Remembering my strength. Remembering who I was before grief convinced me otherwise. Vanessa took money. She took trust. She took peace for a while. But in the end, she lost far more than she gained. And Jason? Only time will tell what he lost. As for me, I kept the house. I kept my dignity. I kept Harold's legacy. And perhaps, most importantly, I stopped apologizing for protecting what belonged to me. The sun slipped below the horizon. The room grew quiet. And for the first time in 18 months, I felt something I thought had disappeared forever. Not happiness, not victory. Something better. Peace. In the end, I learned that kindness and trust are beautiful gifts, but they should never come at the cost of self-respect. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are not strangers, but those sitting closest to us at the dinner table. And that's why wisdom matters just as much as love. Looking back now, I don't regret helping my family. I only regret ignoring the signs when my generosity was being taken for granted. And if there's one lesson I hope you take from my story, it's this. Protect your heart, protect your future, and never let anyone convince you that growing older means becoming invisible. Because no matter your age, your dignity, your voice, and your worth still matter.